I want to tell you about the night my family locked me out of my own home. Not metaphorically, not in the complicated emotional sense that people mean when they say a family has closed itself off. Literally. The locks changed. My key no longer worked. My belongings, what they had decided to include, were in 2 boxes on the front porch. It was 11:15 at night, and I was standing in the driveway of the house my grandfather had built with his own hands in 1962. Let me tell you how I got there. My grandfather, Thomas Carter, had spent 40 years building a construction business from nothing, the kind of American story that people reference as proof that patience and work and integrity can produce something lasting. He had passed 4 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, the way the people who deserve peace sometimes actually find it. He had left behind a business, a legacy, and the house on Carver Street that he had built himself, that had been in our family for 60 years. And in his will, carefully prepared, clearly written, witnessed and notarized, he had left that house to me, not to my father, not to my uncle, to me, with a letter that explained why. My grandfather and I had been close in a way that skipped a generation. My father and his father had a complicated relationship, the specific friction of 2 strong-willed men who loved each other and consistently struggled to show it in ways the other could receive. But my grandfather and I understood each other. He used to say I was the only one in the family who listened more than I talked. I used to say he was the only one in the family who said things worth listening to. We had spent Saturday mornings together for 20 years. His workshop, his stories, the specific education of a grandfather who understood that the most important things he could teach me were not found in any curriculum. When he passed, I was devastated. When his attorney called me 3 weeks later, I was shocked. When I read the letter he had left with the bequest, I understood everything. My father had not taken it well. This is perhaps the most significant understatement I have ever written. My father had assumed, with the specific certainty of a man who has never questioned his right to things, that the house would be his. He had been living in it for 2 years before my grandfather passed, had been managing it, maintaining it, had told anyone who asked that it was essentially already his, just waiting for the formality of the paperwork. The paperwork said otherwise, and my father, confronted with a legal document that contradicted everything he had assumed, had done what people do when assumption meets reality and reality wins. He had decided to fight it. The legal proceedings took 18 months. The will held, the house was mine. And 2 weeks after the final ruling, I came home to find my key no longer worked and 2 boxes on the porch. I stood in that driveway for 4 minutes. I know because I counted. Not because I was waiting for something, because I needed 4 minutes to let what I was looking at become real before I responded to it. 2 boxes, a changed lock, my name not on either of them, just set on the porch with the specific thoughtlessness of someone who had packed in anger and not in care. I picked up the boxes, put them in my car, and called my attorney. Her name was Sandra. She had represented me through 18 months of legal proceedings with the precise and unhurried confidence of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how it ended. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Emily," she said, "what happened?" "They changed the locks," I said. A pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said. "I'm in my car." "Good," she said. "Don't go back to the door tonight. I'll call you in the morning." "Sandra," I said, "what happens now?" "What happens now," she said, with the calm of a woman who had been waiting for this call, "is exactly what I told your father would happen if he did something like this." I drove to Dana's apartment. She opened the door before I knocked. She had been watching for my car. She did not say anything when she saw my face. She just stepped aside and let me in, and made tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table and waited. That is what friendship looks like. I told her everything. The boxes, the porch, the key that no longer worked. The 18 months of legal proceedings that had ended 2 weeks ago with a ruling that was final and documented and apparently insufficient to prevent my father from changing the locks of a house he no longer legally owned. "He changed the locks," Dana said, to confirm she had heard correctly. "Yes," I said. "Of a house that is legally yours." "Yes." "Your father," she said, "changed the locks." "Yes." She sat back. "Emily," she said, "he just handed Sandra everything she needs." I knew that. I had known it standing in the driveway counting the minutes. That was partly why I had not knocked on the door, why I had not called my father, why I had gotten in my car and called my attorney instead of letting the anger that was building in my chest find its way into a confrontation that would have satisfied me immediately and cost me strategically. I had learned patience. My grandfather had taught me.
"I've spoken to the sheriff's department," she said, "and I filed the emergency motion. We have an appointment at 9. "An appointment where?" I asked. "At the house," she said, "with a deputy. Your father has until 9 to open the door voluntarily, or the deputy will facilitate your lawful entry." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Sandra said, "that by 9:15 this morning you will be inside your house, with or without your father's cooperation." I arrived at Carver Street at 8:50. Sandra was already there. A deputy's car was parked at the curb. My father's truck was in the driveway, which meant he was home, which meant this was a choice he was making in real time, standing inside a house he didn't own, waiting to see what would happen. I stood on the sidewalk. The house looked the same as it always had. The same blue shutters my grandfather had painted the summer I was 12. The same porch where we had sat on Saturday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, and the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. His house. Now, mine. At 9 o'clock, Sandra knocked on the door. My father answered. He looked at me, then at Sandra, then at the deputy standing at the edge of the porch. Something crossed his face. I had been prepared for anger and found something more complicated. The specific expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a strategy that has not worked and is only now fully understanding the cost. "Mr. Carter," Sandra said, "you are currently in unlawful possession of a property that was transferred to Emily Carter by court order 14 days ago. You are also in violation of a court order by having changed the locks on that property. The deputy is here to facilitate Ms. Carter's lawful entry. I'd like to ask you to step aside." My father looked at me, not at Sandra, at me, and I looked back. "Dad," I said quietly, "step aside." He did. I walked through the front door of my grandfather's house, my house, for the first time as its legal owner. The deputy stayed for 30 minutes, long enough to document the situation, note the changed locks, and confirm that I was in lawful possession and my father was not. Sandra handled all of it with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had prepared for exactly this. My father sat in the living room, not speaking, not leaving, the specific stillness of a man who has exhausted his options and is waiting to understand what comes next. I found what I was looking for in the kitchen. On the counter, where my grandfather had always kept it, was his coffee mug, blue ceramic, a chip on the handle from the year I was 9 when I had dropped it and cried, and he had said, "Emily, things that are used get chipped. That just means they were worth using." I picked it up, held it. "Okay, Grandpa," I thought. "I'm here." I sat across from my father. The deputy had gone. Sandra had stepped outside to make calls. It was just us. In the house my grandfather had built. "I want to say something," I said, "and I need you to hear it." He looked at me. "I know you believed this house was yours," I said. "I know that's what you expected, and I know that losing it, to a court, to a will you didn't know existed, to me,
has been the worst kind of humiliation. He said nothing. But I need you to understand something, I said. Grandpa didn't leave this house to me to hurt you. He left it to me because he trusted me with it, because he knew I would take care of it the way he took care of it, because he believed I would understand what it meant. I paused. The lock you changed last night was the last decision you made about this house, I said. Everything from here is mine. My father looked at the floor. I have one question, I said. He looked up. Were you going to tell me where my boxes were, or were you going to leave them on the porch all night? Something that might have been a very small smile, or something adjacent to one, crossed his face. They had a tarp over them. It was going to rain. Not an apology, but something. My father moved out 2 weeks later. Not happily, but without further legal incident. Sandra had made the consequences of further legal incident very clear. He found an apartment 20 minutes away. We speak occasionally, not warmly, not easily, but honestly. More honestly than we spoke when I was simply the granddaughter and he was the son, and nobody was saying what they actually meant. I repainted the porch that first spring, the same blue my grandfather had used. I found the exact paint color written in his handwriting on a card he had kept in the workshop. Carver Street Blue, Sherwin-Williams, 2023. I painted it myself on a Saturday morning, with coffee and the specific silence of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be. I still have his mug, the chipped one. Things that are used get chipped. That just means they were worth using. He was right. He was always right. And he saw something in me worth trusting with the most important thing he had. I intend to spend the rest of my life being worth that trust.